Hi there guys, I hope you have had a good day. So Anthony Joshua is obviously going to be fighting Kubrat Pulev next and then maybe going into a fight with Tyson Fury, but he has explained he isn't interested in the whole circus act with regards to the Tyson Fury fight, because obviously he's not fighting Tyson Fury next, he's actually fighting Kubrat Pulev. So he says that the fight, when it's made and done, signed, sealed and delivered, obviously they've agreed on a deal, so it is part of the way there. They just need to make sure they come through their next respected fights, then the fight's on. But until that time comes, Anthony Joshua is not interested in talking about Tyson Fury because that's not who he's fighting in next, it's actually Pulev. Now, obviously Pulev is a mandatory to Anthony Joshua's IBF belt, and then there is supposed to be a WBO mandatory, which will be Alexander Usyk, provided he comes through Derek Chisora, which is a fight that is coming up very soon, and an extremely interesting one as well. But, I mean, if Anthony Joshua has to fight Alexander Usyk, that does put off the Tyson Fury fight. So at the moment, it is unclear what they are doing with that WBO belt, whether they are going to relinquish it if they are not allowed to fight in Undisputed with Tyson Fury, or whether there is some way in which they are going to make sure they maintain that status of a WBO World Champion going into Undisputed. But then again, that is another fight that is in the future for Anthony Joshua. The one that he is focused on is Kubrat Pulev, and rightly so, because he's overlooked one opponent before, Andy Ruiz, and that did cost him. I mean, many were saying that he didn't overlook Ruiz, he knew how good he was, but his mind definitely wasn't on the job on the June 1st, 2019. We can all agree on that, because Wilder had announced his fight with Luis Ortiz, Anthony Joshua versus Ruiz fight week, but then didn't give a date or venue until many months after, so you could see there was something in there that Deontay Wilder was maybe trying to overthrow Anthony Joshua and let him know that he's not fighting him no matter what. So Anthony Joshua was in a position where he was defending his world titles, yes, but there was no mega fight on the horizon after that Ruiz fight. That is where he became a little bit disillusioned with the sport of boxing, and ultimately what he wanted to do was become undisputed champion. That was no longer in the picture in 2019, which is what Anthony Joshua wanted to achieve by the end of 2019, but it didn't happen because Wilder did not want to fight Anthony Joshua. So at the end of the day, what was he fighting for? Was it road to Ruiz, or was it supposed to be road to Undisputed? That is why Anthony Joshua will not overlook anyone anymore. That is why the fighter in front of him is the most important thing to AJ. Because the thing about being world champion is it's just as hard to maintain as it is to get there. In fact, it probably is harder to maintain that status, because when you are trying to get there, nothing will stand in your way. You will do anything possible, anything you can to win that world championship belt. But once you're there, it's kind of hard to find the things to motivate you to maintain that status. It is hard to get up in the morning and do your hill runs when you are wearing silk pajamas. So at the end of the day, it's just as hard, if not more difficult, to maintain that status of being a world champion, especially when there are guys like Andy Ruiz, Kubrat Pulev, Dillian Whyte, Alexander Povetkin. They want to win that world title, and they are extremely motivated to do that, whereas Anthony Joshua is extremely motivated to become undisputed. So you can see how sometimes a champion will fall victim to that because they want to win that undisputed championship. That is what is on their mind, not defending the belts they currently have. But I think that Anthony Joshua has definitely matured a lot over the past year, and obviously he wants to maintain that status, and this time he has a Tyson Fury fight on the horizon, whereas last time he didn't know who he was going to be fighting next. And I mean, that's not important really. I mean, you don't really need to know who you are fighting after the guy you are fighting now, but when it's Ruiz, when it's a late replacement, Anthony Joshua wanted to know who he was going to be fighting in December, and he did. After June 1st, it was going to be Andy Ruiz again. But the difference is this time he has Kubrat Pulev to beat. If he beats Pulev, he gets Tyson Fury. So there is even more motivation for Anthony Joshua to beat Pulev. He's not just a mandatory challenger. He's not even a challenger to Anthony Joshua. He is the thing in the way of Anthony Joshua getting to Tyson Fury. So that is why Anthony Joshua will be extremely motivated to beat Pulev, because all of what Anthony Joshua has worked for his whole career, what he has tried to achieve, which is that undisputed fight, that undisputed championship, and the only thing standing in his way is Kubrat Pulev. That is why Anthony Joshua will be extremely motivated for this fight, because after that, he gets Fury, and obviously Fury, after his next fight, gets Anthony Joshua. And that is why Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury's next fights are extremely important that they win, because they are so close, they do not want to stumble at this point. Obviously, Tyson Fury is no longer fighting Deontay Wilder and will now fight in the UK a week before Anthony Joshua. So that means that maybe even possibly Tyson Fury could be at Anthony Joshua's fight, seeing as Anthony Joshua is fighting after Tyson Fury. So that would be kind of interesting. Maybe some sort of face-off in the ring after AJ Pulev, provided Anthony Joshua wins. That is a possibility. I mean, it's just great to think that going into 2021, we get this fight between Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, but at the moment, Anthony Joshua is not interested in talking about Tyson Fury because he's not fighting him next. He's fighting at Pulev, and he has learnt his lesson to not overlook a mandatory challenger or even a voluntary. Overlook no one in the heavyweight division because they have been waiting an extremely long time, their whole lives in fact, for this opportunity to become heavyweight world champion, so no one can afford to be underestimated. AJ won't make that mistake again, especially now, considering that he has that fight on the horizon, that fight to motivate him in his mandatory fight with Pulev. And I think that especially after the Andy Ruiz Jr. fight, I don't think Anthony Joshua is going to need motivating for any opponent that he steps in the ring with. They are there for a reason. They are there on merit alone, more so than anything else, because Anthony Joshua has set this mold of constantly fighting top 10, top 15 opponents when he gets in there, because he is world champion, and ultimately he should be in there with Andy Ruiz Jr.'s, with Joseph Parker's, with Alexander Povetkin's. Those kind of fighters are the fighters that Anthony Joshua should be facing, and he is, of course he is, but I think that many of those fighters who are sitting just outside of the champions should be fighting one another, because obviously Anthony Joshua will be facing Tyson Fury next year, hopefully for undisputed. I mean, I know he doesn't want to talk about it, but ultimately he will be. So there is going to be that fight, 2 fights probably next year, meaning that no mandatories, no voluntaries will be faced. So why not fight one another? Why can't these pool of heavyweights sitting just outside of the champions, the top 10s, the top 15s, why can they not fight one another to see who is number 1 challenger to the new undisputed champion? That works out perfectly, because then the undisputed champion can not only defend their titles, it means that that number 1 challenger is a big fight for the new undisputed champion. And that is what we want. We want to see the best fight the best, and realistically a lot of that doesn't happen these days. I mean, you see Dillian Whyte taking tough challenges back to back when he is number 1. That is admirable, but you don't often see that. You don't often see, say, Ruiz getting in there with Deontay Wilder. You don't see, say, Joseph Parker getting back in there with Ruiz again. I mean, for a world title, yes, they will do it, but not for a potential opportunity at a world title. So you have to ask the question, why do they not back themselves? If they believe they are number 1s, then go for it. Fight one another. Fight whoever is put in front of you. Dillian Whyte does it continuously. Anthony Joshua does it because he wants to be number 1 and recognised as that status, so he has to fight these challengers. I mean, there are so many fighters there. Daniel Dubois is coming up, but needs to step up. He will have that against Joe Joyce. So respect to both of them for taking this fight when Dubois is ranked number 2 within the WBO, so fair play to that one. I mean, Ruiz is coming back against Chris Arreola. I mean, it's an okay fight for a comeback, and he's with a new trainer, so I guess we can give him that one. But after that fight, he needs to go for a Luis Ortiz, or try and get Deontay Wilder, who's no longer fighting Tyson Fury. He's going to be free. If he doesn't retire, try and fight him. These are the kind of fights that should be being made, because then they get their rightful opportunity at fighting a world champion. If not, then they get there through fighting intercontinental fights and working up through the governing bodies. That's how they do it. That's how many fighters get to the top or get their opportunity by fighting lower level oppositions. It's because they get those intercontinental fights. Then they work their way up the rankings and get the mandatory spot. Not through fighting the best. You can see so many better fights and better fighters in fights like 50-50s, and they don't get a mandatory slot or a world title opportunity for beating that top 10 opponent. That is the problem at the moment. And I think until that system is reviewed, things aren't going to change all that much, because how can Charles Martin be ranked number 2 by the IBF? I mean, Daniel Dubois, brilliant fighter. He is going to be incredible in the future. Definitely a world champion at some point. I think he's brilliant. But who has he faced that warrants him being number 2 in the WBO? He's good enough, I agree with that. But who has he fought to get to that position? You have to ask those kind of questions. So He's fighting Joe Joyce, which is a credible opponent, so that's brilliant. But again, you have to question how certain fighters get to their positions within a governing body. It's not through fighting the best. We see that mold again and again. Because look at Deontay Wilder's resume. Yes, Tyson Fury is on there, but a draw and a loss. Luis Ortiz, but then again, who is Luis Ortiz? Who has he beaten? The same mold again. Guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.